A new international report says the federal government has to do more to protect the integrity of this fall's election. The Transatlantic Commission on Elections Integrity prepared the report as one of a series of assessments in the run-up to elections in countries like Canada and the U.S. The report calls on Canada to impose steep fines on social media giants like Facebook that allow objectionable and misleading content to live on their platforms, if they do. So how realistic are those demands? Alan Rock is commissioner of the Transatlantic Commission on Election Integrity and, of course, the former federal justice minister. He joins me in studio. Hi, Mr. Rock. Great to see you.
Thank you, Vassie. Nice to be back.
So you have studied this issue of foreign interference quite robustly. What did your report conclude, essentially, about the threat that it poses in the upcoming election?
Well, Canada is not immune from the threat that is faced by every democracy in the world. There are people out there are countries out there who want to disrupt our democracy, who want to pit Canadian against Canadian on inflammatory issues, who want to interrupt and disturb the political debate that's going on in this country before the election. So there's a consensus, I think, among people who understand what's going on, that we have to make ourselves ready. And in fact, the Government of Canada has taken some important steps in the last 2 or 3 years to protect ourselves from foreign interference.
What does ready mean?
Ready means, well, in fact, the commission of which I'm a member created an election risk monitor. And it tried to define what ready means. Ready means actually 3 things. First of all, what's the state of your law? What laws govern the election? How is it organized? How is it administered? Are there independent commissioners? Do you use a paper ballot? How do you protect the voter information? That sort of thing. Second, what's your cybersecurity defense strategy? So does the country have a well thought out, up-to-date, effective strategy for countering cyber attacks and cyber interference? And thirdly, how do you deal with your social media platforms that are the source of so much good, but at the same time, so much potential harm in the course of public discourse? So that election readiness monitor applied to Canada produced what's really in this report that we released this week.
And I know what you went over is that while the government has done a lot, especially where the social media platforms are concerned, there is a certain vulnerability. Can you expand on that?
Exactly. The government has strengthened our laws through the Elections Act. The government has consolidated our cyber expertise and spent money to bring them together and strengthen them. But the government, in our view, hasn't done enough in terms of social media. The minister has expressed her expectations. She's met with them. But frankly, self-regulation hasn't worked in Canada, and it doesn't really work anywhere when it comes to social media platforms.
So what might regulation, or what should regulation in this country look like from your perspective?
Well, it's a difficult question because, first of all, you don't want government to be the arbiter of what is true. That just doesn't work. Second, you don't want at the same time to regulate where you don't have to. For example, what we're suggesting is that there be a roundtable created. I mean, internet governance over the last 20 years has relied upon a multi-stakeholder roundtable to try to reach a consensus as to the best way forward. So we say before we regulate and put more laws in place, let's convene a roundtable with the minister present, members of the public, the platforms themselves, of course, but also expertise in the area of technology, political actors, and let's try to reach consensus as to what the issues are, what are the problems we're trying to solve, and what are the best ways to solve them, and try to prepare a code of conduct with a broad consensus as to how the social media platform should behave.
Would that be in lieu of laws, or do you believe that ultimately some sort of legislative measure might be necessary?
Ideally, there would be a code of conduct agreed upon by that broad group by consensus that the social media platforms would conform with. And this wouldn't
do you think, not to interrupt, but do you think that that's possible given what we've seen in the past few years?
I think we have to try it. And if it doesn't work, then legislate the code. Just require certain conduct. Now, there are certain regulations you can enact that don't deal with freedom of expression, that don't deal with content. For example, many of the social media platforms have user agreements with people who are on them, but they're rarely enforced. Facebook, for example, prohibits users from putting up false or fraudulent information. When the Nancy Pelosi tape was exposed, Facebook declined to take it down. So If they enforced their own user agreements, that would be a start. You could regulate that and not threaten freedom of expression. You could regulate the social media platforms so that they avoid manipulation of their popularity indices. For example, sometimes the Russians will see an extreme view expressed and then give it 1,000 likes, so leaving the artificial impression that it's more popular than it is. That shouldn't be capable of manipulation, and you can regulate the companies to avoid that kind of abuse. You could regulate to prohibit impersonation of public figures. You know, with deep fakes and all the other technology these days, you can have a public figure appear on video and seem to say things that are outrageous.
There's already ones of our political party leaders in this country like that.
I'm not surprised, and it's going to become more and more common. So you could require them to take down obvious fake videos which could manipulate the public or mislead them. Beyond that, when it comes to truth or not, it's very difficult but for two reasons. First of all, there is freedom of expression in this country, which is a very important right that we have to protect. And secondly, who's to say what's true? There are nuances, interpretations, there's spin. I mean, you know about spin.
What?
And so, you know, where does truth lie? And who can decide that? So,
and should the government ultimately be the arbiter of that?
The other aspect of the matter is that it's not good enough just to solve these issues in Canada, because the social media platforms are global. So that's why this Transatlantic Commission is trying to bring together as many democracies as possible to take similar steps, to share best practices. And Canada is leading a G7 effort called the Rapid Response Mechanism, which is intended to do the same among G7 countries. So the more we can internationalize this approach, the more we can get countries signing on to it, having a united front against these giants in the social media industry, the better off we'll be.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you, Mr. Rock. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Vassie.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video. Thanks for watching.